I welcome you all to our this flagship webinar on coal transition to net zero carbon region. I have the honor to welcome you all, including Dr. Parekh. We will just wait for another 2-3 minutes for Secretary, our Chief Guest, Secretary Coal, to join. As you know, India Energy Forum was formally inaugurated in February 2002, and we celebrated our 20th anniversary this year. It is a non-profit NGO set up with the mission to help evolve a national energy policy aimed at development of a sustainable and competitive energy sector in India. It's a think tank of the professionals in all verticals of the energy. It is probably the only organization which champions the cause of total energy, all forms of energy ranging from coal, power, thermal, hydro, oil and gas, nuclear, renewables. India Energy Forum takes an integrated look on the energy scene. We were holding conferences, one each on the above sectors every year before the COVID restrictions came in. We then decided, the new team under the leadership of Mr. Shahi, we decided that we will have virtual webinars. And we started from August 2020, touching all critical subjects. We already have organized 21 virtual webinars. This one is the 22nd in the row. And all this a privilege and to honor, to welcome our chief guest, Dr. Jain, Secretary, Ministry of Coal. Sir, we welcome you and thank you for joining us. We have over 200 highly experienced professionals as our members. It's a think tank of professionals. With these opening remarks and support of you all, India Energy Forum has traveled a long way. We started when Mr. Bami was the president of the forum. He had a very long tenure in Energy Forum. He guided and established the foundation of this India Energy Forum. We get very good response. All our conferences previously, which were physical, were highly successful. We have a quality speakers. I support the view of Mr. Shahi when he says that all the webinars organized by India Energy Forum, we had very quality and fruitful discussions on the topics we decided. In future, as he said, we will continue to organize all webinars on the sectors, and he will try to invite Secretary of the concerned ministry as the chief guest. We had already 2 secretaries. Secretary Power came for a webinar on transmission distribution. Secretary Petroleum came on the conference seminar on the oil and gas. Today is the 3rd in the row, webinar on coal. And we are fortunate that we have Dr. Jain, Secretary, Ministry of Coal with us to bless us with these welcome remarks. And very good morning to you, all of you all. We look forward to your support. Today we are going to release our bi-monthly Total Energy magazine, which is a flagship magazine distributed to over 500 professionals and bureaucrats in the country. Today evening, we will release that 3rd edition of this year, financial year 2021-22. With these words, I now hand over to Mr. Gautam, Chairman of the Coal Group, to please proceed with the agenda for the webinar. Thank you all. Thank you all. Welcome you all again. Good morning. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bambani. Good morning to everyone. Dear energy experts, friends, ladies and gentlemen. It is indeed a great pleasure to welcome you all to the India Energy Forum Bizarre Munch on very important topic of coal transition to net zero carbon regime. We are very fortunate to have very distinguished and learned panel of very eminent speakers who will express their views on this very important topic. We are also very much honored to have Dr. Anil Kumar Jain, Secretary Coal, as our chief guest at this webinar. On behalf of IEF and on my behalf, I welcome Shri Anil Kumar Jain, Secretary Coal, Government of India, as chief guest of today's webinar. We are very happy and feel greatly honored and privileged to have him with us. Very, very thankful and feel obliged that he has kindly agreed to spare his valuable time from his busy schedule to be with us and give his valuable views and guidance to us on this very important topic of coal transition to net zero carbon regime. I welcome Shri R V Shahi, our President, India Energy Forum, former Secretary Power, Government of India. He is the motivating force behind organization of such discussions on very important and high relevant topics of the India's energy sector. I welcome Shri Sanjay Joshi, Chairman ORF. He is also the Vice President of India Energy Forum, to have taken the trouble to be with us and speak to us on this important topic. I welcome Shri P.S. Bhattacharya and Shri A. Kya, former Chairman Coal India, and thank them for taking trouble to be amidst us and give us the benefit of their valuable views. Mr. Mishra, I suppose, is not in a position to join, but anyway, I hope he will join. So I welcome you all the same. Shri Rahul Tongia, Senior Fellow, Center of Social Economic Progress. He is a research scholar and an eminent analyst of coal scenario. We are grateful to him to let us have the benefit of his analytical views. I welcome Shri U. Kumar, Advisor SL Mining and former CMD NCL and SCCL. I welcome Shri B. Bambani, Secretary General IEF, and Shri S.K. Grover, Convener Coal Group. I welcome all the dignitaries, the government officials, galaxy of energy experts, research scholars, academicians, and other participants, and thank them for sparing their valuable time. Coal, a carbon-intensive energy source, is the center of a global debate on energy and climate change policy. In a growing number of developed countries, the elimination of coal-fired generation is a key climate policy goal after the signing of the Paris Agreement under 2021, and will be the most debatable topic of the climate summit in the November 2021 at Glasgow. In other countries, especially in Asia Pacific region, coal still remains the preferred source of electricity generation and is seen as an abundant and affordable energy-based load fuel. As the world is trying hard to find viable alternative energy sources to coal, coal still continues to maintain its sheen, particularly India, China, and other Asia Pacific regions, and shall continue to dominate the energy scene for at least 2 to 3 decades positively. International Energy Agency in its report has stated that India's dependence on coal as an energy source will remain at least up to 2050. Many countries have already declared as 2050 the target year for attaining net zero carbon emission. Even China has claimed to achieve this net zero carbon emission goal by 2060. India will be under great global pressure to also give some commitment. India, being in a very big net importer of energy, is in a very precarious situation. Coal is the only indigenous energy fuel abundantly available in the country. India is already importing 80% of its oil needs and also importing, in spite of huge available coal resources, 250 million tons of coal, out of which 200 million tons is thermal coal. The coal industry is taking several initiatives to augment the coal production and coal evacuation infrastructure, including laying of new pipe railway lines under the Atmanirbhar Bharat Abhiyan, Government of India has allocated 50,000 crores for creating coal evacuation infrastructure. It includes 18,000 crores for mechanized coal transport. CIL will also pump about 1.22 lakh crores on the projects related to coal evacuation, exploration, and clean coal technology by the year 2024. Achieving 1 billion ton of fuel output as its target. Out of the proposed spend of 1.22 lakh crores, Coal India has planned to invest 32,000 crores on coal evacuation, 25,000 crores on mine infrastructure, and 29,000 crores on coal development by the year 23-24. These moves are in line with the central's effort to bring down coal imports. CIL accounts for 80% of the coal production of the country. India is running one of the largest and the most ambitious renewable capacity expansion program in the world. Has already attained and installed renewable energy capacity of 100 gigawatts. India has set a new target of achieving 100 gigawatts of solar power, 60 gigawatts of wind, 10 gigawatts of biomass, and 5 gigawatts of small hydro by the year 2022. India can use all the power it can generate, and this program will supplement the energy needs of the country. With rising energy needs, coal production and utilization is going to increase. India will be producing 1 billion tons of coal by the year 2025-26. To my mind, the only course available for us to make use of coal as green as possible by taking some important policy decisions and right action in the direction of improving coal quality, improving coal combustion efficiency, ensuring greener usage of coal like coal gasification, etc., converting coal into other products like ethanol and methanol from coal, carbon capture and carbon dioxide utilization. We should concentrate more on carbon utilization because sequestration is, let us for the time being put it in back burner, and also even talk in terms of pricing of coal. The challenge therefore before us is to have taking all aspects of energy requirement and the pressure on global warming and climate change, a very good roadmap of transition of coal to net zero carbon regime. That is what we are going to discuss today. We will be hearing in more detail from Secretary Coal and other esteemed speakers to follow. May I now invite Shri R V Shahi, President India Energy Forum, to give his presidential address. Mr. Shahi, please.
Thank you, Gautam. Let me at the outset welcome Dr. Jain. I am grateful to him when I rang him up the other day with the invitation that if he could join and inaugurate this program, which is designed on the basis of what should be the strategy for the future to cover this management of transition for every sector, every segment of energy, coal being the most important. He readily agreed. In fact, he said, where is the request? So that was true. I sent him the request formal and he is with us. So I again join my friends who have already welcomed you, Dr. Jain, and I'm grateful to you. I also welcome all the eminent speakers. So we have Kirit Parikh, we have Mr. Bami and other friends. I won't be able to give the names of each one of them because this group is always, and this type of seminar organized by IEF is always attended by very, very eminent personalities who have done a lot of things and achieved a lot of 5 years. All groups of energy have seen a lot of changes, technological changes. In fact, we have started seeing not changes, but disruptions, starting with solar, which within a period of 5 years, one couldn't have imagined that its price will come down from 14 rupees a kilowatt hour to 2 rupees 50 paisa a kilowatt hour, the way it has come down. And with solar and around solar, many other technological changes and disruptions are being thought of. one after another announcements are being made, one after another scientific community, technologists are coming forward as to how, if we have to go in such a big way around solar, what could be its effects, consequential effects, what would be the benefits, and how do we handle the situation. So therefore, this is a period in which changes could be even faster, as the people are saying. IEF attempts to have sectoral discussions and at the end of it, integrate, synthesize these discussions to evolve an approach and suggest to different agencies and authorities. As of today, we have two reference documents. One is the Niti Aayog Energy Policy of 2017, and very recently, early 2021, International Energy Agency has brought out India Energy Outlook. And that, I would say, is the most recent work in an authoritative manner that one can rely upon. And we get some ideas as to what the future holds for us. I think the India Energy Outlook brought out by International Energy Agency covers a period of 2020 to 2040, and it paints a picture of how we should go about. As we know that in India, so far as reserves of energy is concerned, coal, we are best placed. We have almost 360, 370 billion tons of coal goes on. We have an estimate of something like 750 gigawatt of solar that has been done. And then again, this is evolving, more studies and more estimates, updated estimates come. We have an estimate of more than 300 gigawatt, 300,000 megawatt of wind. Of course, our estimates of hydro is 150 gigawatt. We have done so far about 50 gigawatt. And nuclear, I would say at present it is even less than 2, but one can say 3 to 5% depending on how it goes on. So these are our energy ingredients in our total energy basket. Now, the International Energy Agency suggests that over a period of next 20 years, as of today, the share of coal in the energy basket is about 42%. It was 35% 10 years back. It is 42% today because of coal-based generation capacity coming in a big way. Over a period of next 20 years, this might go down to about 33 to 35%. So what is 42% might go to. And at present, in the energy, in the power process, the share of solar is about 4 to 5%. It may go up to about 30% plus over a period of 20 years. That is the projection that International Energy Agency has brought about. And we know that India is concerned, government is concerned, everyone is concerned about our excessive dependence on import of petroleum fuels. I mean, at present, we are importing crude of the order of 85% of our consumption. We are importing gas of the order of 50% of our consumption. So I mean, in both these cases, while gas sector projects that from present 6 to 7% of energy basket, it might attempt to go up to 15%. It might go to 12, 13%, depending on how city gas distribution and other consumption sectors move on. But then so far as petroleum products are concerned, there is definite strategy to bring it down substantially. So that is the window of opportunity for the domestic sector. Coal sector is a reservoir with us. We cannot forget it. Even though I did that calculation, if it becomes about 35% by 2040 of the total in the generation. Today, coal constitutes 70% of our power use. And as I said, so both will converge in 20 years, and that is what is the projection of IEA. But then I did the calculation, by the time our growth on generation, so there will be, as opposed to the average growth rate of about 5% plus, 5% plus over the years, it could be about 2 to 3%. Now, 2 to 3% growth, it is not that many people think that coal will vanish. It cannot vanish, at least in the next 20 years that we can see. Beyond 2040, again, what would be the technological changes and what will happen, and how do we shape our own coal pre-combustion and post-combustion? Because there are definite suggestions. Earlier, we had discussions on technology in the energy sector, and some of the suggestions that have emerged, and they are not new, they have been there for a couple of decades at least, if not more, that in coal, which is our best reserve, which constitutes most important energy source for India, we have to do things which will make its pre-combustion and post-combustion activities environment friendly. And therefore, coal gasification has been talked over the years. Now we are also talking of coal to hydrogen, coal methane. These have been talked. I think they have been at the talk stage. They have been at some research stage, but definite outcomes have yet to be seen. And it is that which we have to now discuss, that how do we manage this transition from now to 2040, in which I am very clear, and I go with the estimates, which may be approximately okay insofar as International Energy Agency is concerned. I do not believe, like many others believe, that we have to forget about coal. We cannot forget about coal. And its growth might definitely, if the new sources of power generation are coming forward, obviously its growth will reduce. It has already slowed down now. New coal plants are not coming up in a big way. They came in last 10 years. It will slow down. So that's the best thing that we can do. And that is what would be the subject of discussion today. And we have very eminent speakers. How do we do things in terms of technology development? How do we network our research? How do we network Coal India Limited, NTPC, BHEL? I tried in the year 2004-5 with the chairman of all these companies that can we integrate the efforts of these major leading organizations, the users, the manufacturers, and the suppliers of coal, so that the coal consumption and coal use before it is sent to the power plant, after it is sent to the power plant, when it is consumed, and after combustion. Can we revisit some of the technologies issues and redesign our things so that the burden of carbon dioxide is reduced? The other day we had a discussion on coal to hydrogen. Again, we will have CO2, but much less to manage. Coal gasification will have CO2, but much less to manage. But these have remained, as I said, on discussions and a little bit of research work in our laboratories and there. Today, it is good that major organizations are coming forward, both in public sector and private sector, to see how best we use this 350, 370 billion tons of coal reserve in the future, so that our dependence, firstly, on petroleum products from outside is reduced. We become more or less self-contained. We will have to import, but more or less self-contained. As of today, we were just before the secretary came, we were chatting that today coal is at the top of the world. Just today, it is reported in China, it is 212 rupees a ton. So therefore, its relevance has to continue. But it is also up to us, the technologists of this, the scientists of this, and the policy makers of this sector. It is to us how best we also address adequately the problems arising out of carbon emissions. With these words, I once again welcome particularly Dr. Jain and all the distinguished speakers and participants. Thank you very much.
May I now request Shri Jain to please give his inaugural chief guest address to the gathering. Dr. Jain, please.
Thank you, Mr. Shahi, for giving me this opportunity. And I was looking at the list of participants. I find so many old colleagues and bosses, people I worked with. Here, it's a pleasure to be with all of you. You asked me to give a keynote address, but I feel very hesitant because there is so much knowledge in this room, and I've been hearing previous speakers. I heard you also. So, coal sector is one, fortunately, which has not seen too many innovations and technology induction. So, when I am in office today as secretary, and all of you have been, in the rider's seat 10 years back, 5 years back, 15 years back. So not much has changed. There's not so much new to say, excepting that the opportunities keep changing. In a sense, you mentioned, Mr. Shahi, that coal to hydrogen, coal to gasification, they are not new technologies. But to my mind, with the changes that are happening in the world, today maybe it will be possible to gasify coal, and I'll cover that in my speech. So I'm also very happy that you have chosen, you have hit the nail on the head by choosing the topic, coal transition to net zero carbon regime. Because I find that there is a little bit of shyness in India, of talking about of coal. This as if कि क्या बात हो गई, किसने गलत बात कर दी. So and that is because the narrative comes as long as coal was building the energy infrastructure of the West, the transmission systems, their power plants, their consumption setups. Then coal was very fine. And now that they've stabilized their energy demand, as you know, OECD countries are now registering a degrowth in their energy demand. There was a slight increase in electricity because they were electrifying their energy. Now I notice even that is falling. So once they have stabilized their energy systems, now coal has become outcast. It has become, so we have to be in India very cautious. And as you have said, speakers have said, that coal has to be part of the net zero paradigm. Renewable energy coming in, coal going down, or oil going down, electric mobility coming is a part of the natural competitive structure of an energy mix. In fact, there is a term which we borrow from the field of biodiversity, which is called diversity index. That how diverse is our energy mix? Just like in a forest, if you have preponderance, 80%, 90% of just one species, if there was some disease or something, that forest will wipe out. So there has to be a diversity in a forest. Similarly, in an energy system, it must be diverse. If coal prices shoot up, we should be able to migrate to other fuels. If oil prices, we don't have any substitute to oil at the moment in our transport system. So when the oil is gone up to $80, it may even go up more, the country will suffer. So in terms of diversity index, in fact, UK every year publishes its diversity index through a tool called Shannon-Wiener. The Shannon-Wiener diversity index, higher the number, higher the diversity. India, which was quite diverse in 1980, I was looking at it. India it had a more diverse energy system than China. It had a more diverse energy system than Brazil. But today, I'm sorry to say that because coal has remained, very high in the energy mix, oil has remained very high. Because of that, India's diversity index is now the lowest among the major energy, among the top 7, 8 energy consumers in the world. So if coal has to come down and a better fuel, cleaner fuel, cheaper fuel comes up, I think it should be welcome. But then that day when it comes, it will come. Until then, to my mind, coal should not be denounced. Today, I'm happy that, in January, February, March of this year, even though lifting was not much, Coal India kept producing. So as you're all aware, on 31st March, we had nearly 100 million tons of stock in Coal India. The previous high was last year, it was 74 million ton. So it is that stock today which has saved the nation in a way, because in April, May, Coal India lost about 250 people to COVID. So our operations are impacted. And then the monsoons, but that stock has stayed with us. Now, what is my thinking on how can coal be made a part of the net zero transition? Number one, to my mind, this net zero construct has also come from the West. I mean, why don't they classify countries into groups? That the developed countries net zero, one category of countries net zero plus 10%, another group net zero plus 20%. So net zero is today tends to be understood in the Indian media, and I'm sorry to say in very, very high circles, as if it is net carbon scenario. And when it talks of carbon for India becomes coal. So there is some kind of a misunderstanding that net zero means zero coal. That is not the case. So this is a definitional issue, and it's a matter of great financial import for our country, because our thermal power plant fleet is new. It hasn't depreciated. The mines that we are developing, MDOs, we are signing contracts. In Mahanadi Coalfield Limited, we have signed an MDO at Siarmal for 50 million tons. That kind of huge investment MDOs will make. You can't suddenly back down. So we need to be very sure that our steel vision talks of taking steel production from blast furnace route 100 million ton to 300 million ton. Aluminium, we claim to be sufficient, but let's not forget that we export alumina and we import finished products. The value addition has to take place in India. All of that will need coal. So net zero emission does not mean zero coal. Is the first education, I would call it, which doyens of industry like yourself and think tanks can do. Secondly, I have a feeling that coal mining is often misunderstood as a power generating coal power plant. And it is believed, whenever we sanction commercial mines, people say India is again leading up the carbon path. Well, if in a consumption of 965 million tons, if India is importing to 35 million tons, it doesn't make sense to, send away 1.3 lakh crore rupees to Indonesia, Australia, South Africa. So coal mining is like any other mining. It's like iron ore mining. It's like bauxite mining. In fact, we are able to do underground mining also, which is not so, carbon emittive, but there is scope for a lot of work there. And somebody mentioned that in first mile connectivity, 35 largest mines of Coal India produce almost 75% of our coal. So all of them, we have sanctioned about 15,000 crore rupees worth of rapid loading system, coal handling plant, conveyor belt. So by next year, when they are ready, even the dust which mining raises will become minimal. So to my mind, all the technical inputs that can go into coal mining so that we reduce the carbon footprints. There is so much of vehicular movement. If the HEMMs, heavy earth moving machinery in the coal mines, if that can be shifted to LNG powered, we are trying that experiment in Mahanadi right now. If we can get electric, traction in our heavy earth moving machinery, then coal mining will not be perceived to be so anti. In fact, I released a news in the press cover as per the satellite imagery is more after 20 years of mining than what we got it 20 years back. So the kind of afforestation and other things which Coal India has been doing. So to my mind, all the technology induction like carbon capture and storage, carbon capture use and storage, LNG based HEMM, electric mobility, infrastructure technology. If all of that can become a part of the coal mining process, then coal mining will no longer be an eyesore. The people will not talk that people living in close vicinity to close mines are suffering from diseases, etc., etc. That is the second point I wanted to make. Thirdly, the increasing trend is towards, pithead-based generation. Mr. Shahi and others know it, that today the plants at Korba, Sipat, Kelgaon, Farakka, NTPC plants, Rihand, Vindhyachal, they are all working at all 105% PLF, 110% PLF. And the plants up country, you see, Punjab has already shut down its own plants at Ropar and Bathinda. NTPC hardly uses the Dadri plant because it is so expensive to transport coal. I don't want to use this forum to talk about costing, but we all know it, that what Coal India gets in Ranchi in CCL at 900 rupees a ton for its coal, it becomes 4,500 rupees by the time it reaches Dadri. If the railways are going to charge 2,300 rupees a ton for over 1,200 kilometers, then this generation is going to shift backwards towards the pithead. So once, and renewable energy prices also. So the more power that we generate close to pitheads, the lesser there is, energy wastage on rail movement, lesser dust, dispersal as the coal moves. And that is also going to reduce the carbon footprints of coal-based plants. So that is another area which will help coal become, less harmful, less carbon emittive, and become a part of our net zero agenda. The fourth point, again, which was brought out by some speakers earlier, that we need to move to, C to C, coal to chemical. Just like you keep hearing about old oil to chemicals, O to C. And I'm told that the new refineries which are coming up on the West Coast are not going to be producing much of petrol and diesel and LPG. They're going to be producing petrochemicals. Similarly, earlier, even though the technology to extract chemical energy from coal is very old, but in the 1980s, 90s, 2000s, India was not producing enough coal to meet its power requirement. And power is the first requirement. So that time, there was no coal available. But now that we are reaching 1 billion ton coal by 24, only Coal India will produce, and all the others will again bring in 200-300 million tons. Now is the time to extract chemical energy from coal. And as you look at the economics of it, we were trying to work out the economics. You see, ethanol, sugarcane-based ethanol, the government has approved 62-63 rupees a kg. Now, methanol is less, energy intensive. It has less GCV as compared to ethanol. But even then, at the comparative cost, if we were to convert coal to methanol at pitheads, it won't cost more than 45 rupees or so. So, well, for ethanol, there's another logic that money goes to farmers, etc. But in the case of coal, money goes to poor people in the eastern India and those states, which are dependent on the coal economy. Coal gasification will have its own challenges. It's highly water intensive and there are some emission issues. But maybe, you see, coal carbon capture, usage, storage is something which found impetus 10-15 years back. When I was in Planning Commission, Dr. Sharma remembers 2013-14, India was being asked by UK and other countries to join the technology development. But that time we said, no, it is going to raise the cost of our power, etc. We didn't join. But today, to my mind, if we wish to prolong the life of coal and remove the emission part of it, I think India needs to develop, to spend money, put some R&D team. Sometimes I think it should be NTPC and power sector we should be doing it. But because I'm a coal supplier, I'm a coal vendor, but maybe if they don't do it, then I will have to do it. So these were my, basic. I'm very happy that we are talking about this. How can coal be a part of the net zero agenda? I think this is something which the climate negotiators of India, and I will also contribute to it. It's high time that coal got the izzat it deserved. Right now, when coal prices, in Indonesia, about $100 a ton, China also double pricing, electricity blackouts, etc. So coal is the swing energy provider. If no other energy source is there, coal is there. So we cannot forget the role which coal plays. And let us also not forget that coal also helps to keep the energy prices stable. Today, the notified price regime of Coal India is helping, to keep the electricity prices stable. Coal India has not increased its notified price for power in 3.5 years. And still sometimes I read articles very recently that coal prices need to be brought down, etc., etc. Then you'll close down Coal India. And so coal brings energy supply security. It brings, price security. So it is with these remarks that I want to thank all of you for giving this opportunity. Thank you very much.
You have been very nice. You have covered
Very
the
good.
subject so aptly and so nicely. And it is really a matter of food for thought for us. Your guidance will be really very useful to us. And we will work on these lines. And we will certainly, your remarks were very wise and very valuable for us. So I thank you, sir, for taking out this time. I have been advisor in Ministry of Coal and I retired in 2000. So I have been meeting you, but then it has been on a rare occasions. So thank you so much, sir. So I will proceed ahead and I will request Mr. U. Kumar now to please come in the picture, introduce the speakers and take over so that other speakers now can be there on the screen. Mr.
Thank you,
Kumar,
Mr. Gautam.
please.
Good morning to all of you. And before I proceed, I must thank Mr. Jain and Mr. Shahi for putting the agenda before the House so effectively. In fact, when Mr. Jain talked about the stability brought about by coal, it's only the other day that, till the other day, the consumers or the power sector was not lifting the coal. Coal India was trying to persuade them to lift it, and nobody would listen. And all of a sudden, the coal crisis had become so acute in the country that that in spite of Coal India carrying a lot of coal, Coal India is still being blamed. So irrespective of whatever we do, whatever coal does, it's a sort of it's a punching bag, and it will receive the kicks all the time. Mr. Gautam has given me the task of introducing the speakers and the theme. I'll reverse it. The theme and then the speakers. Now, but the theme, whatever I had to say, more than that, Mr. Gautam has covered, Mr. Shahi has covered, and ultimately our Secretary Coal has covered it. I'd only like to add a few words to it, that even those countries which have declared target date for carbon neutrality, most of them are those in whose in whose sector, power sector, the coal contributed a very small amount. So by sacrificing or by giving up the coal, they do not stand to lose much. And in fact, the whole energy scenario is not going to get affected. There are others like China. I mean, they have declared the target dates, but the way they are going ahead with increasing coal production and increasing coal consumption, there is a very reasonable doubt whether they are serious about it or simply for the consumption by the world, and that they are claiming to be very progressive and very conscious of environment. Now, we are aware that there is international pressure on India for declaring the target date for achieving carbon neutrality. One misunderstanding which is there, Mr. Jain has cleared, that carbon neutrality does not mean zero coal. Carbon neutrality will be achieved even while consuming coal. In India, coal has a special place. I mean, coal accounts for 74% of total power generation. And even going forward, the contribution of coal in the power sector will go down. But so far, the overall quantity is concerned, quantity-wise, coal will continue to reign supreme. As per assessments about 2040, the contribution may go down to about 46% from 74%, but the total quantity which power sector will consume will be something like 1,600 million tons. So irrespective of the international call for achieving carbon neutrality and for setting a date for that, we have to take it with a pinch of salt, and we have to modify it according to our conditions, according to the structure in which the power sector operates here. We have one international acclaim for concentrating on renewables against the target of 175 gigawatt by 2022, told that 110 gigawatt has already been achieved. And we are very confident that 175 gigawatt will be achieved. Going forward, by 2030, the target is 450, and even that will be achieved. But all said and done, I mean, the type of growth that power sector needs can renewables take care of that? The estimates are that by 2040, our total power requirement will be something like 2,200 gigawatt. If we leave the share of coal to whatever it remains, even the nuclear, the renewables will have to contribute something like 1,600 gigawatt. And if we take the power PLF, then probably it will go to 6,000 gigawatt. Now, can we afford the fund? Can we afford the space for setting up all these solar power stations for this level of generation? So I think when we talk of neutrality or the achieving the zero carbon regime, we have to take our conditions into account and not get pressurized by the international community in declaring a target date. We have to look at our own interest, we have to look at our own future, and we have to act accordingly. Now, from what I've said that, and Mr. Jain also felt that way, Mr. Shahi also feels that way, and then I am sure entire House feels that way, that coal will continue to remain important. Coal will also continue to remain the prime energy source in the country, even prime fuel for power generation in the country. But then we have a responsibility. The polluting effect of coal, that has to be taken care of. We have to make our coal cleaner, and also our power generation systems more modern, so that the generation of pollutants gets reduced. It's very unfortunate that the coal sector was moving very smoothly towards cleaning of coal. That mandate has been withdrawn. It's being argued that no, it's not government's intention that coal washing should stop. But you know that slight amount of pressure or the coercion under which things were moving, that having been removed, our nature is such that any difficult job we give up. And coal washing is a difficult job, and coal washing costs money. Power sector is not prepared to pay. Coal India is not prepared to take this burden. So, but because of the pressure, things are going on. Now, that mandate, removal of that mandate, I think that should be given a fresh look. And similarly for power sector, I think the modern technologies, all the technologies that supercritical and ultra supercritical, probably a decision has already been taken that all new power stations will utilize these technologies, and I'm sure that will be followed. So, in a nutshell, irrespective of whatever international community is asking for, we are conscious of our responsibilities, and that is reflected in the fact that we have a very massive program, very ambitious program for renewables, but we can't be pressurized into doing something which is going against our interest. So we have got three very learned speakers today. Unfortunately, Mr. P.S. Mishra has not been able to join. He's CMD of ECL. Unfortunately, yesterday, the rainfall has been of the order of 410 millimeter in ECL command area. It had never happened. The maximum that it had faced was 320 millimeter. Yesterday it was 410 millimeter, and the rains are continuing. Heavy rains are continuing. So practically all the open cast mines have been badly hit. In fact, approaches to some of the underground mines have been cut off, and Mishra is in the field. He's very conscious of his commitment, and he has said that he's proceeding towards the office. It will take almost an hour because of the disruption in communication. But he says that once he reaches there, he will let us know. And if the webinar is still continuing, he will still like to make his contribution. So our first speaker is Mr. Sanjay Joshi, Dr. Sanjay Joshi. I don't think he needs any introduction. I mean, in energy circles, he's a very well-known personality. And I mean, the work which is being done in energy sector, the think tank work, he's leading the show. And he's a very original thinker. And he has on his tips, on his fingertips, the developments, all that is happening, that are happening internationally. And he is in a position to orient our thinking according to the international developments. Dr. Joshi currently heads the ORF, Observer Research Foundation, as his chairman and chief executive. He has over the last 10 years spearheaded the rise of ORF as India's premier think tank and window into the world of global affairs. He joined the Madhya Pradesh cadre of Indian Administrative Service in 1983, took premature retirement in 2009 in order to pursue his academic interests. He has been visiting associate at the International Institute of Strategic Studies, London, and distinguished visitor to the program on energy and sustainable development, University of Stanford, USA. He speaks, publishes, and comments on the world of technology, energy, and development, framing them in the context of global shifts and the challenges of growth and employment faced by emerging economies. Has a regular YouTube commentary on global and current affairs called India's Watch, which is also available as a podcast. On behalf of the House, I take this opportunity of welcoming Dr. Sanjay Joshi and inviting him to share his thoughts with us. Dr. Joshi. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Upendra Kumar, for those very kind words. I see lots of old colleagues and distinguished friends around the table before me. So it is daunting to be able to speak on energy in front of this very stellar audience that you have. Okay, let me try and start by telling you where I'm speaking from. You see a backdrop behind me, and it's a very different kind of backdrop. Let me tell you, for 20 months now, I have been living off the grid. We do not draw grid power at all. That's a necessity because electricity lines don't come down. I've been holed up for 20 months in a little farmhouse in a remote corner of Noida. And we support a family of 14, including all the head. We run our air conditioning. We run all our systems. And speaking from here, it is very easy for me to say, oh, net zero is possible. But I'm also aware of the problems of net zero. As a person, as a person from the energy field who's worked in the sector for 20 years, and as a person at the moment who has been living off the grid with absolutely no support. We draw our own water, we run our own systems, and everything operates at the moment on solar with some residual backup. Now that is important, with some residual backup on a diesel generator. So there are costs to redundancies. there are costs to storage, which you incur when you talk about energy transitions. And many times we do not, when we start talking about fuel sources, when we start get into this debate of solar versus wind versus natural gas versus coal. See, many times we look at all of them in separate silos, which actually, as my friend Anil Jain very succinctly remarked, that it is not right to look at these in these separate silos. No, we live in an energy system. Any kind of fuel source you use ultimately is a systems approach. It is not a singular source of fuel that is going to provide you energy. Now, when we start talking again of the so-called, net zero and coal transition to net zero carbon regime, there is always in countries like India and other emerging economies, there is a genuine dialectic going on between development and sustainability. The fact is that as long as we have a predominantly, an energy grid, which is going to be largely based on fossil fuels, then no matter what you do, any project that increases your energy footprint is going to increase your carbon footprint. Whether it is smart cities, whether it is raising manufacturing, expanding services, or even expanding health infrastructure, building roads, building railways. And given the state of existing energy economies in lots of parts of the developing world, any expansion, if we start talking about growth, is only going to be making our carbon footprint bigger. Now, yes, we have to lower the carbon footprint of our production. We have to also lower the footprint of our energy consumption. But let us again repeat that this is not something that happens overnight. This is something that takes time. It is something for which we need to plan a transition. And given this, on the road to net zero, energy security concerns are going to become far more serious, far more menacing, unless we plan for this transition. And you've recently seen what has been happening in Europe with gas prices. You've seen what has happened to the United Kingdom, the crisis about enough drivers not being available to cart petroleum. So correctly, so far the strength of any energy security doctrine across the world has been in that one word which Anil Jain mentioned. He spoke of the word diversity. See, that is where energy security has nested. And diversity means just not diversity of sources of fuel. It means diversity of sources of supply. And countries have actively pursued these diversification strategies to ensure that energy supplies remain secure and they remain affordable. Because you cannot be pushed into a situation where energy becomes unaffordable, like what threatens to happen in Europe this winter, with gas prices shooting up by as much as 500%. And if COVID-19 has taught us anything, it has been to underline the importance of not just diversity, but it has taught us the importance of diversity across supply chains. It has taught us the dangers of what happens when your supply chains do not have resilience. And energy is nothing but a huge supply chain architecture, no matter what the source of fuel is, whether it is solar, whether it is wind, whether it is coal, whether it is natural gas, whatever it is, there is a supply chain architecture which you need to think in terms of, and it nests in a much larger energy system which needs to be planned for. So when we talk energy transitions, when we talk of net zero, then it is precisely about first building domestically. Yes, it is indeed about building domestically, and coal is, as everyone has underlined, a very strong domestic base, a very strong domestic resource. But it is also about simultaneously getting integrated into a diversified, reliable, and assured energy supply system. That can happen both domestically and should happen both domestically as well as internationally. So there needs to be serious conversation. I'm not just political signaling. There needs to be serious conversation on the pathways to this energy transition. Unfortunately, those conversations are not taking place. We are still talking in terms of all or nothing. We are ignoring all factuals, always counterfactuals about this energy transition. And the energy transition is real. It is not an adversarial zero-sum game. It is not about coal versus solar versus something else. So how this energy transition needs to take place? What are the problems with this energy transition plan? They must be on the table. They have to be part of that conversation and need to be addressed as problems and not be dismissed. Yes, India today has an international solar alliance. India is recognized as a leader. We are almost well on target to achieve our 200 gigawatt targets of renewables. And India has rapidly scaled up its solar photovoltaic capacity. But it is time we thought further. And I'm talking about a person who's at the moment entirely dependent on solar energy. Now, if we talk net zero, then a green transition is very different from greenwashing. So we hear a lot of glib talk today in responsible circles, in responsible policy circles, about the magic of electric vehicles, about the magic of hydrogen as a fuel. There are active TV debates pushing one over the other. But the fundamental fact is that both electricity and hydrogen are mere carriers of energy. They are not primary energy sources. And if our real goal is net zero, then EVs or hydrogen do not solve the problem. So as long as our grid is going to have a large carbon footprint, electric vehicles compound the problem. They don't solve it. They add to it. They only increase our carbon footprint. The same holds for hydrogen-based fuels. The primary source of fuel has to be, where it is coming from, how it is coming from, not just where. It can come from coal, it can come from natural gas. It is not just the source, but the process. And the process is, as I said, a technology process. It is a supply chain process that needs to be looked at. So what are the technologies being used for conversions? What goes into it? How much carbon is getting embedded into the process or not getting embedded into the process, or being extracted from the process? See, those are important discussions which need to take place. So there is no point in forcing coal out of the grid. Everyone, that is a consensus around the room. There is no point in forcing coal out of the grid without a credible roadmap for first the adoption and then the absorption of cleaner energy into the grid. At the moment, there are problems on both. It's a technology issue. Second, it's a policy issue. First of all, the grid, you must have investments in the grid to make it resilient enough to absorb fluctuating and intermittent sources of power at prices which make green projects viable. Unfortunately, many green projects, solar projects bidding today are on a race to the bottom. And frankly, I can tell you, bankers are seriously concerned that the next set of NPAs are going to arise in forces which have driven solar tariffs down to the levels where they no longer remain viable. First of all, there are huge problems in signing PPAs. So there is a crisis building up there. See, let us not close our eyes to that crisis. So, and a resilient grid. Now, these are national security issues. These are energy security issues. We need resilient grids. It is about building strong, secure baseload generation on which intermittent energy spikes in supply and demand can ride very smoothly on the back of spinning reserves. Spinning reserves, yes, can be battery fuel, gas turbine fuel, magnetic flywheel fuel, hydro fuel. There are lots of things which the world of technology keeps on offering. But there's a turbine feed controls. But the fact is that they may not be as economical for large-scale energy storage. They can store energy for days, but they cannot store energy for many days. They're good for short duration peaks and can help meet peak loads. But they also respond equally quickly. And they can store power. Flywheels can store power for hours and days without losing speed, even if they have lower energy than batteries. So there are various options which are available. Eventually, with the world of energy, we must remember always that the world of energy has always been about disruption. There are new technologies knocking at your doors every day. There are new developments. So eventually, any energy policy, when you talk of larger construct, it is extremely important that an energy policy must be technology agnostic. it cannot, the policy cannot pick winners and losers. What picks winners and losers are costs, the costs of mitigation, the cost of net zero, the cost of power going into the grid. What is going to be the most competitive? And that is the game which competitive technologies play. And that is one which should be allowed to play happily in the policy domain. So whether it is clean coal technologies, whether it is gas-based technologies, whether it is solar technologies, whatever it is, whether it is completely new shifts. Now, there are no very detailed studies on the cost of mitigation. I mean, recently I did come across one study by Deshmukh and others, which is, I think, dated January 21, and which interestingly shows that India's very aggressive targets to install more than 400 gigawatts of wind and solar electricity generation by 2030, with more than 2/3 of that capacity coming from solar, are actually not the best cost options. Now, that is important. Now, we can debate the study, but the fact is these analyses need to be done and to be put on the table. And they have looked very closely at both the electricity costs and the carbon mitigation costs required to reliably operate India's grid in, say, the year 2030 for a variety of wind and solar scenarios. And they've looked at scenarios ranging where coal is at 200 gigawatts up to 600 gigawatts. And no matter what the size of your coal production is, there's still a baseline coal production always existing. But no matter what the size of that baseline is, whether it is 200 gigawatts or it is 600 gigawatts, the interesting thing that the model show is that the most promising option for reducing transition costs are systems where solar photovoltaic comprises only 25 to a maximum 50% of total renewable target across all the scenarios. So what are we pitching for? Where do we pitch it? How do we build for a transition? So these are extremely important questions which need to be debated as we move into the next COP. And at the next COP, I think besides energy transition, one fact which should be discussed very, very closely, we keep talking net zero as part of that of the Western discourse. We need to talk about carbon squatting. We need to talk about the carbon capture which has happened, the great carbon loot in the atmosphere, and which the squatters refuse to vacate. They need to create space for emerging economies, because as we've said, when we start looking at scenarios, even the IEF projection, all the other projections, we show you that yes, there is going to be reasonable amounts of coal-based power which you will have to live with in certain countries till at least 2040, 2050, even 2060, depending what replaces what, how fast we eventually go into nuclear-based load generation, or we do something else, or something fantastic happens on the technology front. So no matter what happens, whatever the political debate is, achieving high renewable energy targets does not by itself avert the need to build new fossil fuel power plants. There are scenarios in which, in spite of all the gigawatts you put up, you would still have to be adding capacities which are coal-based capacities. The point is, if we do the scenario planning and we start looking at the correct incentives and disincentives on this pathway, then we can do the transition in a manner which makes the country energy secure, which makes sure that the wheels of our economy run smoothly and we do not hit an iceberg. The danger is very, very real. So if coal is to continue through this transition to a significant extent, there is also a need to send those clear policy signals to investors, bankers, financiers, and make room for it under international negotiations. It is extremely important. I mean, these can become red lines for us. Provided we present a cogent case. So far, we have not been able to present a cogent case on many of these factors. And our studies have clearly shown that even with these transitions, with the substantive coal base, which goes up to even 300 gigawatts of coal-fired capacity, the world has very little to fear from India on the carbon front. Our net per capita emissions based on coal do not shoot up. They still do not reach where the rest of the world is. So these are negotiating tactics which will need to be played, negotiating hands, which we need to play on the international game. So as I said, to conclude, the world of energy indeed has been all about disruption. And therefore, it is important, as technologists, as policymakers, to be technology agnostic. And being technology agnostic means not allowing policy to pick winners and losers, and allowing technologies to compete within the framework, saying, yes, net zero is a target. Now, please go ahead. What can give us this net zero target at the lowest cost, at the cheapest cost of energy? Now, there can be many pathways to go green. Yes, possibly coal can be a pathway to go green also. The technology can provide some answers. So let us focus on the end goals and let the markets decide the pathway, let the cost decide the pathway. And technology has constantly come forward to change the constitution or what resources rule our energy consumption. It will continue to do so. It is not that we will keep on burning coal forever. The Stone Age did not end because we ran out of stones. And it is not, that if coal ends, the world of energy ends. You will still have unburnt coal in the ground. You will not need it anymore. But yes, there will be better viable options available. But that is the transition we need to plan. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Doctor. Such a learned speech, very comprehensive, and really sets the goal, this is the path for going forward on this achieving this objective. You have always been a source of inspiration for us. We always bank on you, and you have been very kind. Whenever we have made a request, you have come forth very, very willingly. And I'm sure the participants have gained a lot of thought process with his speech. Thank you very much, Dr. Joshi. I claim him to be my friend, very long-standing friend, and again, a very kind friend who has never let us down. When we have made a demand on his time, he has been very willing to accommodate us. And in this case too, a simple telephone call was good enough to make Dr. Tongya agree to our request. Dr. Tongya is a senior fellow with CSEP, the Center for Social and Economic Progress in New Delhi. His work focuses on technology and policy, especially for sustainable development. This institution was earlier called Brookings India. He leads the Energy, Natural Resources, and Sustainability Group at CSEP, and is also active in broader issues of technology. Dr. Tongya's work spans the entire gamut of energy and electricity. It focuses on supply of options, including renewable energy, covering finance, grid integration, etc. Smart grids, which use innovative information and communication technology to improve management of the electric utility grid, issues of access and quality, and broader issues of reforms and regulations, including electricity pricing. He's also a non-resident senior fellow of the Brookings Institution and adjunct professor at Carnegie Mellon University, and was the founding technical advisor for the Government of India's Smart Grid Task Force. He is a prolific writer, and his representative publications are Future of Coal in India, Smooth Transition or Bumpy Road Ahead. In fact, even before this carbon neutrality or transition became a buzzword, Dr. Tongya had already dealt with this problem. He has also written Power System Management. He's written on amendments to the Electricity Act 2003. Then energy, sorry.
I think you've clarified I'm a jack of all trades, master of none. But really, what I do wish to just share, I think maybe my bio is online, so no need to bore people with a limited meaning.
Okay.
But really, it's the integrated analysis of all of these energy challenges is what I focus on.
So let us hear Dr. Tongya. I think he's a wonderful thinker and puts things in very great, nice perspective.
Thank you. Thank you, Upendraji, and thank you for the organizers. And of course, Sanjay and Dr. Jain and Mr. Shahi and others have really set the tone. Is my screen visible?
Yeah.
PowerPoint presentation?
That's right.
Okay. So I'm going to really just spend a little time putting coal in context of net zero. And a lot of what I'm going to allude to are already public on our website. CSEP, Center for Social and Economic Progress. We're a nonprofit, all our work is public. So there's a climate emergency. The IPCC's recent report talked of a dire picture, and it emphasized that to stay within 1.5 degrees, the world should have zero carbon emissions by 2050. Well, that's not exactly what they said, but that's what's being interpreted. Now, the Paris Accord was really the main step before where we are today. And what it really let people and countries do was set their own targets unilaterally. So it was a break from the past, where in the past they were trying to differentiate between developed and developing countries. Key points to recognize: one, most pledges by developing countries other than Brazil were on relative emissions, which is fair because our in energy demand and emissions will only grow. Second, unfortunately, almost no country is on track for the Paris goals except India. But even if the countries met their Paris goals, we would not be aligned with a 1.5 Celsius world, or barely even 2. As of now, we are on track to a 3 degrees Celsius rise. So in response to this challenge, a number of countries have announced what are called net zero. And I will put these in quotes, you can see, or China called it carbon neutrality. So one country is called it climate neutrality. So these are pledges mostly around the date 2050. China's neutrality pledge was 2060. So the problem with a lot of these pledges is several-fold. One, are these really zero or net with offsets, or even worse, accounting tricks? And I'll explain. This is very important for developed versus developing. Second technicality, are these only for CO2? Or are they also covering all GHG? Methane in particular has become identified as a serious challenge because of much higher methane leakages across the supply chain, from extraction, transport, utilization. There's of course small amounts of methane emitted from coal production from the mines. So what is covered or not covered is a serious challenge. Even if a country says, I will become zero by 2050, 2060, what is your trajectory for reaching that? Because that shape, that area under the curve is really what determines the cumulative emissions. And that is what really matters from a climate change perspective. And fourth fundamental challenge is, if the world is supposed to reach 2050 zero, let's debate separately whether that's right or wrong. But if the ambition is to be 2050 in total, that cannot mean that all countries hit 2050 at the same time. The high emitters should actually be reaching zero well before 2050 to give some more time for the low emitters to eventually phase out their carbon emissions. And of course, a subtext of this is talk is cheap. People have pledges 20, 30, 40, 50 years out into the future. What is it that you're doing in the short run? A, to prove credibility, but B, because if we apply an area under the curve framework, the cumulative emissions matter. So we need to reduce rapidly all the low-hanging fruit that's available, which includes efficiency gains, which includes decarbonization of the power sector. The rise of renewables is a positive. It does not compete with coal in the sense that these renewables will really take care of our growth in electricity, as opposed to phasing out the coal power plants that were just built relatively recently. And ultimately, what is missing from these pledges is, how do we compare across countries? So you can ignore the box on the right, which just tells you the global budgets. But if you assume different levels of carbon budgets, we were emitting in 2019 CO2 from fossils of 34 gigatons globally. So if you do the math, that tells you how long you have, assuming same level of emission. This entire concept of net zero is based on the word net, and it includes offsets. So it means a country will partner with another country and help them reduce future emissions and take credit for that reduction to continue emitting today. I don't know about you, but I would love to have a dieting plan which involves other people eating less.
Yeah.
But at a global level, offsets are irrelevant because it's a zero-sum game. It helps a national accounting schema or a corporate accounting schema. It does not solve the global challenges. Some of the offsets are questionable in terms of time constants. Planting a tree is very, very important, very, very helpful, and takes decades to actually sequester the quantum of carbon. But some people are attempting to say the year I plant the tree, I'm going to take the credit for that carbon offset in that particular year, even though the physical removal is over a long period of time. There's a wonderful quote in The Guardian by Simon Lewis, where he talked about, the ex-governor of the Bank of England, climate advisor to Prime Minister Johnson, talking about this investment of 600 billion as carbon neutral, despite investing in fossil fuels. And the quote said, the reason we're net zero is we have this enormous renewables business. He went on to claim that renewables avoid carbon emissions that would have otherwise happened. So they offset the emissions in fossil fuel. And continuing the quote, this is not net zero. It is an accounting trick. Renewables are anyways the new business as usual. You're not being green when you say I'm putting up solar power. You're being economically wise because it's cost effective. What is missing is the concept of additionality. And even in climate finance, a big fight is what type of finance are you giving? Most of the finance, you look at the GCF, Green Climate Fund, most of it is debt financing for RE, but yet that is counted as support for being green. And the biggest issue is rich countries may be helping poorer countries reduce future emissions, but the costs of abatement or getting rid of your carbon vary where in the curve you are. McKinsey had a very famous marginal emissions abatement cost curve, MEC curve, and they pointed out that the tail of your emissions, maybe from industry, maybe from household heating or something, are very expensive to abate. Now here, offsets mean that the rich countries are saying, I'll help a poor country put up a solar panel. And in return, I don't have to get rid of my tail end of emissions, the expensive emissions. That is grossly unfair to developing countries. I'm not saying you shouldn't partner to accelerate RE, but the accounting benefit of who takes credit must not accrue to the developed countries. It should accrue to the poorer countries. So the claim made, as I mentioned, why the countries say this is a good idea is they say all carbon is equal. Well, that's why it doesn't matter where you do it or who does it. But if all carbon is equal, then we cannot ignore historical emissions, because in the future, all his emissions are historical. So there are a lot of moves that we've heard to end coal. And a lot of my views on coal are already well documented. We had a book, Dr. Anil Jain, in fact, released it last September on the future of coal in India. And it's been widely recognized even globally. And to summarize the book, which I won't go into more detail, the future of coal in India depends more on the demand side than the supply side. Second, there's a lot of ecosystem issues that we have to think through as we talk about a gradual transition or a less gradual TBD. And third, we should clean up our coal instead of just wishing it away. It's naive to say it won't be required. We've done very detailed grid modeling for the power sector 2030. That study is also on CSEP's website. And we find that even if you achieved heroically high RE targets by 2030, you still need decent level of production of coal-based electricity. And depending on the solar wind mix, which is very key, you could actually still need a very modest small growth in coal output. Now, coal production output need not be the same as coal power plant capacity increase because we have slack. But if you want to retire your dirtier, older coal plants, you may want to have policies that encourage newer and cleaner coal power plants to operate more. So from the book, this is a table that puts into perspective coal use. If you take the total coal consumption, second column, and then put it in per capita terms, and then normalize for the calorific value of the coal. Look at India's. It's lower than the world average. And it's only Germany is worse because they're using their mainly brown coals for domestic consumption. But when you normalize on energy basis, which is a proxy for carbon, you find that the per capita coal consumption in China is 5 times of India. Germany and US are double and triple, and India is half the world average. Second observation, in India and China and South Africa, coal is a very large chunk of your energy mix. But in Germany or US is down to 12%, not because they were very green, not because renewables have taken over, but it's because they've had cheap natural gas. Now, gas is slightly cleaner from a carbon perspective, but it's not carbon free. So here is the per capita gas consumption across countries. Look at where India is. 2 orders of magnitude lower than other countries. So when the world says end coal, I sort of say, no, let us end all fossil fuels as we need to. Leave it to a country to figure out what that looks like, whether it's ending oil, gas. India would actually love to end oil faster than it would love to end coal because oil is imported. So these are the things that are missing from the discourse. So now I'm going to just briefly share some insights from this paper that talks about net zero and alternatives. And this is also on the CSEP website. Here is a stacking of the CO2 emissions in 2019 by country in red and population in black, ordered left to right on the dots at the bottom, which is the per capita CO2 emissions. So the global average was 1 ratio of population to emissions. So the average CO2 emissions in the world, just those high emitters who are above world average, are 78% of fossil CO2 emissions. This is US, this big spike here. This is China. And this on the right side is India, this third bump, far at the right. Before India, you have 89% of global CO2 emissions, fossil CO2. This excludes land use and certain industrial. So every time somebody says India is a problem, it's a big total because of its high population. This is the population on the left side, log scale, and the right side is per capita. The product gives you total emissions. But India is actually very low in terms of its emissions impact. Developing countries cannot jump to zero. South Africa, Sub-Saharan Africa, and UAE are similar despite 100x difference in population, giving 1 billion people 35 kilowatt hours per month per home, which is more than the first rung of basic energy access, entirely from coal, would raise global emissions by only 0.25%. And of course, these poorest of the poor will not use coal-based electricity. They may end up using a fair amount of solar. So in this paper, we offer an alternative, which is an area under the curve framework, which aligns with cumulative emissions. And what we want to do is know the trajectories and work backwards to see how the country's budget works. So the basis for this model says all countries need time, let's call it 30 years as a benchmark, to reach zero after they peak. So if you're a high emitter, you should peak now or have peaked already and decline to zero, true zero. But for low emission countries, you can raise your emissions for some years. So this leads to a new figure of merit. So if per pro rata carbon budget, you can apportion it in different ways. If you're a low emitter, you keep growing at a rate R for N number of years. after which you peak, and after the peak, you decline to zero in 30 years. That's a graceful degradation of your power plants, your railways, your coal mines, your assets. So this is what a developing country could do. You solve for N. For a high emissions country, if you take 30 years to decline, you would actually bust your budget. So if you have Y years to stay in budget at a linear decline, that Y is actually less than 30 years because you're a high emitter. So in this framework, we calculate to N being negative. So what that means is if I want to take 30 years to decline to zero, I should have started my decline in the past. Almost no country today, except one or two, is even declining at 3.33%. So now it's completely unrealistic to just have them say, I will decline to zero, unless they go back to accounting tricks and say, oh, because I'm net, because I financed a solar project in Jharkhand, which is an accounting trick. So globally, if you want to stay within 1.5 degrees rise, your N was -8. 8 years ago, we should have started the decline. If you're trying to stay within, sorry, there's a typo. The second one is 2 degrees rise in the middle. 5 years is all we have left. And 11 years if you're taking a 50% confidence interval. So if you now split this across countries, the blue is for 1.5 degree rise. How many years N do you have? And orange is for 2 degrees rise. You notice that the world average is here in this box. Most countries, large ones, have no time left to stay in budget for 1.5. Looking at the biggest countries, here's your emissions. Here's your trend of emissions last 3 years till 2019, pre-COVID. Your solution for N for 1.5, negative for the world, all the way including UK, France, and barely positive even for India. But if you now allow for a 2 degree rise, India has 24 years of continued growth, followed by a 30-year decline, and still stay in budget. China's 2060 is weak. Even Germany's 2045 pledge is insufficient to keep it within budget. So net zero is very attractive because it makes people think they're doing good and it's better than nothing, but it is insufficient for the high emitters and it is unfair to the low emitters. For a country like India, we should be focusing on flatten the curve. COVID taught us flatten the curve. So flatten the curve in COVID meant you just change the shape of the curve so that the total area is the same. Here, if we lower the growth rate of R, doesn't mean we get rid of the coal plants. We are then allowed a longer time to actually reach zero. And that is the most cost-effective strategy because technologies are only improving over time. But this net zero push actually does exactly what I think Sanjay mentioned, which is, or somebody else mentioned, we don't know what China is doing. They are, for example, increasing their emissions because if you are told you must zero by X, it is rational for you to front load your emissions because you'll have to stop later in the future. But if you talk about cumulative emissions, like I presented in this paper, you actually want the low hanging fruit. So you want to get rid of leakages in your system. You want to start using your efficient coal power plants more, your supercritical, even if they're private sector lacking a PPA, you need to figure out mechanisms to incentivize them. These are the mechanisms that India should focus on. So instead of CBDR, we need zero for the high emitters and avoiding the lock-in for this. So any country who's announced net zero must have data on what offsets are you assuming and what trajectories are you following. So in conclusion, last slide, for India, net zero should happen at the right time. China is about 3+ decades ahead of India in terms of per capita emissions. Now, this does not mean India should say, I'll take till 2090. India can do better. But the real focus should be on lowering growth and avoiding lock-ins. Maybe we want to be cautious of natural gas even. Question one becomes, when do you peak your coal? I did not say end your coal. So a few years in the future, we may peak followed by 30 years decline, which would first come in the power sector, because power sector actually has a much easier pathway. And then, of course, India can make a conditional stance. If there is more support, it could have a faster net zero. Otherwise, it would have a net zero that stays within budget, for example, as given by this paper, this analysis. But we have to be very sharp. True aid. Get rid of all these things that I gave this much loan. Either you give a grant or you only value the delta in funding when you give cheap power. Meaning you give soft loan, you only take credit for that part when some country says that they're providing aid. So in summary, we will need to talk of real zero, which means actually no coal without CCS, but that period may be much further than 2050. So I'm actually in none of the above. Dr. Anil Jain pointed out that the current framework is really saying you can have a zero with some coal, which is, I agree, but instead we should be focusing on a full zero, which would come for India much later in time. We want to be careful of greenwashing. Fully agree with Sanjoy's sort of phrase. EVs, just as one example, electric vehicle. We run a website called carbontracker.in, which shows time of day data on electricity by fuel source, 5-minute resolution, all India, not carbontracker.org. So you can see that if you plug in your electric vehicle overnight, you're increasing the carbon emissions because the time of day factor matters. So in summary, instead of a framing that says kill coal, which I think is not just naive or impractical, but also unnecessary and problematic, we should work on cleaning it up. We should work on making alternatives cost effective when something is truly viable, which includes full batteries, which are not yet cost effective, which includes hydrogen, which is nowhere near cost effective. I mean, it's far worse than batteries. Batteries are lower hanging than green hydrogen. Till then, we will need to clean up what coal we do. State-of-the-art efficiency is one of them. Local air pollution problems are another. But let it phase out when it makes sense to have it phased out instead of an arbitrary sort of end date. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Tonya. It's brilliant, simply brilliant. I mean, I have no other words I have to describe this. It's so well thought. You're going into such great depth in the analytical approach with the figures, which is reveals the true situation in a very telling manner. We always depend on you. That's why we always learn from you. Thank you, Dr. Tonya. For Mr. Shahi's permission, since Mr. Mishra is still to come, we may go ahead with Mr. Partha Bhattacharya and Mr. Jha. And whenever Mishra comes, we will take him in. Shahi Sahib, do I have your permission?
Yeah, I think we should go ahead with Partha and Mr. Jha.
So,
and by that time, if Mr. Mishra joins, then he can make contribution.
Thank you very much. So I'd call upon Mr. Partha Bhattacharya. He doesn't need any introduction. The way he handled Coal India and the way he talks about it is very well known. I think all of you have heard him, all of you have read him, and he continues to be very active, both writing, speaking, and the professionals have lots to learn, and they have learned already from him. So, Mr. Partha Bhattacharya, please.
Thank you so much, sir. And thanks to India Energy Forum and Anil Kumar Jain in particular for inviting me to this event. It was really a great delight to listen to the various deliberations, particularly the presentation made by Rahul. It was absolutely insightful, lots of information and lots of insights. Similarly, Dr. Joshi's presentation was also quite eye-opening. And also the speeches of the Secretary Coal, Dr. Shahi, and everybody else. I will not have much to add to all these insights that has been shared in this webinar. But I'd just like to say a few things that occurs to my mind after listening to all these things. Particularly, I feel that we are really not, after listening to Rahul, it is becoming quite clear that we are really not on course to 1.5 degree limiting temperature increase to 1.5 degrees centigrade. Particularly because China, which seems to be at the top of emission, I mean, it is the largest emitter today, by far the largest, and it is taking more time than 2050. It is extending it to 2060, whereas the concept that Rahul had given, according to that, it should be even faster than 2050, but that's not happening. So taking that into account, I think 1.5 degree is possibly a misnomer. I mean, it is not likely to happen. The consequence of 1.5 degree not happening, that seems to be quite a matter of great concern, because we have actually, climate change was something that we were talking without really feeling about it. But these days we feel it day in and day out. Every time, everywhere, the climate is changing. It is very fast, and the kind of thunderstorms, the kind of cyclones, the repetitive kind of things, what we are seeing, we haven't seen it in the past. I think climate change is actually happening, and if all experts agree that containing global temperature increase to 1.5 degree is the way to come out of this problem, then we are not really there. I mean, our plans, etc., is simply not consistent with that. But Rahul mentioned that what we are doing today is consistent with a 3-degree increase. And if actually 3 degree is the kind of increase that happens, God save the planet. I mean, that is the kind of situation. And in all this, the role of India seems to be much on the lower scale, because India's cumulative emissions are still today much lower than the developed countries. India's per capita emission is one of the lowest today. So even if India closes all its coal plants, all its coal-based power plants, etc., nothing much is going to happen. I mean, that is what the analysis has clearly shown. So I think what basically in this situation, what we should be, or the country should be doing is, we should be looking at what is good for the country and what is good for its people. I mean, that should be the basic criteria. And in that process, I think the main theme should be cost optimization. We should develop a trajectory of trying to reduce emissions, trying to be more cleaner and greener, and develop a trajectory which optimizes the costs. I am really happy to share, and I mean, many of you may be knowing, but I thought that this is something worth talking about, that the Central Electricity Authority last year has actually published a paper which looks at this optimized generation capacity addition program from coal, from renewables, and every other thing. And this actually tries to look at what is the most effective sort of least cost way of expanding capacities and generating power to meet the energy demand, both peak and average, in 2030. That is the target year they have adopted. And the results are very interesting. The results show that compared to renewable, we are at 100 gigawatt today. The renewable capacity in 2030 should be somewhere around 420 gigawatt, according to that model. It is based on a computerized, fairly sophisticated computerized model. The name of the software is called Ordena. That's the software they have used, and it is capable of capturing large number of variables. It's capable of actually dealing with all the complexities. It is also capable of factoring in the trajectory of lowering of storage costs, the solar power costs, solar power tariffs, etc. I mean, the changes that are likely to happen in the tariff of all these powers, etc., that has also been factored in. So with all that, the result is that the solar should move from whatever it is today to about 280 gigawatts, the wind to 140 gigawatts. That makes the renewable component about 420 gigawatt, which is very close to the target of 450 gigawatt that the country is pursuing. And this is cost optimized. But in the same vein, even the coal-based capacity, which is right at the moment is around 200 gigawatt. That is also expected to move by about 30%, 33% in fact, to somewhere around 266 gigawatt. So it's not really coming down, it is going up. It also estimates a PLF of little better than what it is currently today, somewhere around 58% or so, and which means that the total coal requirement would be somewhere around 800 million tons or so for the power sector alone. So with all this, it clearly shows that if a cost optimization is considered as the basis of trying to project where we should go, at least in 2030, we should be consuming more coal, we should be having more coal-based power stations. Yes, coal-based power capacity will go up by 30%, whereas renewable power capacity will go up by 400%. That's different, but that is what is supposed to be optimum. I think this kind of a fundamental study based on inputs available and inputs as they change, it will be a dynamic kind of a program. If this is done and this is carried forward, then I think that the trajectory of how we optimize our generation mix, and it also meets the condition of diversity that has been spoken very eloquently by Coal Secretary and others. I mean, that condition will also be met, and we should be able to move forward in a more smoother, in a seamless manner. And wherever we reach, and whenever we reach, that would be the most optimum thing to do. It may be 2050, 2060, 2070, whatever it is. And as has been pointed out, that Indian contribution to emissions being so low as compared to the population it has, it is not going to be very materially different, very material for the world as a whole. The only other point that I wanted to add, which actually was briefly touched upon by Mr. U. Kumar, is that all this while, when we continue to use coal, and if we see that coal usage will continue even well past 2050, we should try and make the usage as clean as possible. So while surface gas, coal gas, gasification, etc., are being attempted, but they are still not into the operating field, more on the boardroom, more on the drawing board, except for some exceptions here and there. But at the same time, coal washing has to be really given a rethought. I think there we have been lacking, and we are unnecessarily transporting a huge amount of ash, which was not required to be transported to a longer distance. And with railway freight being what it is, I mean, it is definitely a suboptimality in the system that needs to be cured. And as I have been mentioning in the past, I've mentioned in several articles and several papers, that basically it is a pricing problem. Coal pricing is not right. There is a major price aberration. The lower grade prices are very high. The higher grade prices are much lower than what it should be. And as a result, there is no inbuilt incentive for the coal producer to wash their coal, to clean their coal. I think that should be brought in. We should be able to make that incentive built into the pricing system, and that should make a big difference. I think these are the 2-3 comments that I wanted to make, and thank you very much for this opportunity. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, Mr. Kumar. Mr. Kumar, we may invite Mr. Jha now.
Yeah. I was just thanking Partho for the excellent presentation, for his talk that he made. As it is, I mean, as usual, he was very brief but very telling the manner in which he made his point. I'd request Mr. A.K. Jha, Anil Jha, to share his views with us. Again, here is another distinguished chairman, ex-chairman of Coal India Limited. He has spent his lifetime in coal. This was probably a brief period of less than 2 years when he moved away from coal. But he came back and served the coal industry very diligently and very effectively. Mr. Jha.
Thank you very much, sir. Chief guest of the webinar, Shri Anil Kumar Jain, Secretary to the Ministry of Coal, Government of India, with whom I have a good fortune to work for some time in 2019. And I'm very sure that the coal industry in a very competent hand. My respected seniors, and distinguished participants. A very warm and pleasant good afternoon to all of you. It is said that the person who comes to speak in the last should speak the least. So I will not be an exception to the rule. I will try to stick as little as possible. And moreover, when a distinguished speaker like Mr. Partho Bhattacharya has already expressed his brief and comments, there is hardly anything left to be spoken. Now coming back to the subject, coal transition to net zero carbon regime, I totally agree with the views expressed by Mr. Rahul Tongia that if at all it is needed, end all fossil fuel, then to end coal only. And let the country decide what fossil fuel they are going to ration. The conditions vary from country to country. What is the condition in India is not the condition in UAE or in US or in Russia. So if India has an abundance of coal, we should be permitted to coal as much as possible to take care of the energy requirement of our country. We are all aware that still as of now, per capita energy consumption of India is one of the lowest as compared to even the world average. And we don't have any alternative but to depend on coal as far as energy security is concerned. So coal transition to net zero carbon regime may wait until we devise some alternate energy sources. But till then, coal is going to stay. I totally agree with the views expressed by Dr. Jain, Mr. Shahi, and my other speakers that we cannot write off coal as of now. You are all aware that as of now, in total electricity basket, 72% contribution is only from thermal coal. So it will be very difficult to wish away as far as coal is concerned. But yes, as a responsible global citizen, it is our moral duty to see how coal can be used more efficiently, taking due care of the environment. So pre and post combustion use of coal has to be taken care of. It was very ably illustrated by my previous speaker that use of coal should be made more environmental friendly. You are all aware that as far as coal mining is concerned, mining per se doesn't contribute to any pollution except for some dust, and for which coal industry is going to take a lot of measures. They are investing more than 50,000 crores on first mile connectivity. They are going to open very large mines. So coal mining per se will not be a contributor to carbon, but coal use leads to the environmental pollution. Coal use needs to be taken care of so that environmental degradation to be a minimum, to be a very, very minimum scale. And for that, we have to take care of the old plants which are unnecessarily guzzling coal, where consumption of coal is very high. Those plants must be phased out in time-bound manner, and new and more efficient plants should be introduced, because coal is going to stay for a long time. Please make no mistake that in coming 20-30 years, there is no alternative but to use coal. So our responsibility, our duty is to see how coal can be used in a much better way so that environmental pollution are minimized. In this case, we must go for other technologies to make use of coal more environmental friendly. Like as it was expressed, we can go for coal gasification. Yes, much needs to be done as far as coal gasification is concerned. And if it is introduced, as Government of India has planned to convert 100 million ton of coal to gas, syngas. If it has to take place, we will have to start from now. other technological innovations are also needed to make sure that use of coal is environmental friendly. I totally agree with Mr. Joshi's assumption. He has told that any technology will only succeed if it is cost effective. If it is not cost effective, in long run, it is not going to succeed. So we will have to make use of coal in such a way that it is cost effective also. It contributes to as little pollution to the environment as possible. But yes, as of now, we will have to depend on coal. And for that reason, we should ensure that how it could be used effectively so that least damage is done to the environment. You are all aware that last year we have consumed around 965 million tons of coal. And out of that, around 235 million is imported. A country whose coal resources are third best in the world, with a known resources of more than 300 billion tons, to last for more than 100 years, it is importing coal to the tune of 235 million ton at a cost of around 130,000 ton. It is not acceptable. So we will have to see how coal can be produced indigenously and how it could be used in a fashion that it contributes to as little pollution as possible. But yes, make no mistake, coal is going to stay for a long time to come, and we will have to take care how it used can be more efficient, how it can be used in such a fashion that it contributes to as little pollution as possible. As my previous speakers have already intimated, that coal is here to stay. As far as Indian conditions are concerned, we cannot wish away with coal. Other countries' conditions. But in our case, it is the only abundantly available fossil fuel which can be used in future also. So I am sure that this webinar will also go a long way to suggest how coal can be used more efficiently, how India can depend on coal and take care of the world concerns also as far as carbon emission is concerned. Taking care of both carbon emission and taking care of our energy requirement must be in such a way that one should not contradict others. And I am very sure with the technological innovation, a time will come in very near future that use of coal can be made in such a way that it will give least pollution to the environment. I once again thanks India Energy Forum in general and to Mr. Kumar for particular in inviting me to this webinar and to express my view. I spent all my life in coal industry. I have very recently joined in a power sector. So I am learning the power sector also. But I am of the opinion that use of coal can be made more environmental friendly, and we should go for that only. We should not write off coal, but we should do something so that its use may be more eco-friendly. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Jha. The emphasis that you have used, that shows your real conviction. And for once, people say that coal people never agree, but we all have agreed that coal has to live, coal has to continue. The country can't do without coal.
Yes.
And now, for the attention of President Mr. Shahi, Mishra has reached his office. He has asked for 10 minutes time to log in, if you permit. And there are a lot of questions for Dr. Tongya. If you permit, then we could request Dr. Tongya to attend these questions. Meanwhile, Mishra will be able to log in and hear from him. And then, yeah.
Mr. Mishra has come back to office, Mr. Mishra?
Yeah, that's what I told you, that Mishra has reached his office. He has asked for 10 minutes time to log in.
Okay, so
he was up all night moving in the field. I just asked for 10 minutes time. Yes,
So we will go for question answer, and
Yeah.
then at some time when he is
Yeah.
comfortable, we
Yeah.
will give him.
So you can, Mr. You can have your say. I mean, we're really looking forward to your speech very eagerly.
Pranam, sir. A very good afternoon, sir, to all. Actually, since morning, sir, there was the record-breaking rain yesterday. So actually, it was to the tune of 410 mm. So all the areas are.
Your voice is little low, Mishra. Your voice is little low. Can you come closer to the mic?
Audible, sir.
Yeah, that's better.
Sir, actually, Pranam, a very good afternoon to all, sir. Sir, all respected, sir, all have been my mentor during the different periods of time while going through, sir, the list of the speakers which I was going through. Honestly speaking, sir, starting from you, Kumar sir, who was my mentor around 30 years back, then N.N. Gautam Sahab, then A.K. Jha Sahab, and Secretary Cole, all have been my mentor during different periods of time. So, though it's written that I have to give presentation, honestly speaking, sir, I have not made any presentation for this thing. And for last 2 days, there is incessant rain over here. So yesterday the rain was to the tune of 410 mm. And all the areas are submerged, so we are facing some difficult and challenging times. And this sets the foundation for today's discussion, that is it result of any climate change, and do we really need some sort of net zero or the just transition sort of things. So, sir, with this, then what I have to say, sir, actually, sir, if we take some clue from our mythology or from our what our ancestors have told, so there is a couplet in the Upanishad which says that Om Purnamadah Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnamevavashishyate. इस ब्रह्मांड में जो भी है यह भी पूर्ण है, वह भी पूर्ण है. इस पूर्ण की उत्पत्ति उस पूर्ण से ही हुई है, और इस पूर्ण से उस पूर्ण को निकाल दिया जाए तो भी पूर्ण ही शेष बचता है. सो if you make a mathematical modeling or mathematical equation in this, so this equation is valid only either for zero or for infinite. So by saying that we are ready for some sort of net zero or just transition, are we going to challenge this saying? Second thing, sir, that there has been a concept of extinctions during different period of more than 542 million years of time. 5 extinctions have already taken place. And there are so many writers, there are so many philosophers, there are so many thinkers who are advocating for the 6th extinction, basically as mentioned in the Elizabeth Kotler's book of the 6th extinction. So are we going to challenge that also? The third question which comes to my mind, sir, that are we going to challenge the thermodynamic law, basically the second law of the thermodynamics? If there is concept of conservation of energy and the conservation of entropy, so do we want to change those basic thermodynamic or the concept of the physics? If there has to be some sort of Holocene extinction or the Anthropocene extinction, which is 100 to 1,000 times more than the natural background extinction rate. In those circumstances, even if you are thinking that we will mitigate any nuances of this fossil fuel, I think, sir, the development has to take place. And coming to the concept of mining, that if it is leading to any sort of carbon emissions, mining, in my opinion, so again, it's my totally personal opinion, that it's basically a perception problem. it is neither a problem of the policy or the program or the project or the plan, but it is a perception problem. Now, I think whatsoever my mentors are here, the experts are here. If this is a complex problem, then it needs a sort of complex solution. And all the experts need to change the opinions, shift the misconceptions, and alter the conceptions that why to think bad about the use of the fossil fuel if you are going by abiding the environmental laws. Coming to the 4 or 5 basic environmental laws, the first, the precautionary principles. Second, the polluter pay principle. Third, the doctrine of the public trust. Fourth, the intergenerational equity. And fifth, the intergeographical equity. I'll start from the first, sir, that if we abide by the precautionary principles and we have to go for the sustainable mining, so can we think that underground mining is going to the future where the land will neither be decayed nor damaged nor destroyed nor destructed? And by going with some sort of technology, it may be paste fill technology or other technology of avoiding the subsidence or the damages to the land, I think we can go on a massive scale, or some sort of organic and inorganic growth need to be equalized, or some sort of equilibrium can be made where we can go ahead with this. If we don't do so, and if you go only for this, then some sort of reality checks are required to be made. Again, it's my personal opinion, sir, that how will this energy transition affect the interstate relationship? By interstate relationship, what I mean, sir, that around 85% of coal production is concentrated in relatively poor eastern and central states of Jharkhand, Odisha, Chhattisgarh, West Bengal, and Madhya Pradesh. And these states have got a different political economy, different culture, different values, and different set of mindset of the people. So by any shift from this fossil fuel or coal to non-fuel, will it change any sort of relationship with the center, and what will happen to the political economy? That appears to be a greater challenge to me, sir. Coming to particular regions, sir, like if you consider the districts like the Dhanbad, Singrauli, Korba, Angul, Paschim Bardhaman, where coal is the fulcrum of all the jobs and growth, what will happen to the future of these particular places where coal is playing the pivotal role, sir? So that's also a question for which some sort of thinking and rethinking is required to be made, sir. The third question comes, sir, that how will we re-skill and re-employ millions of workers formally and informally employed in fossil fuel dependent industries like the thermal power, the steel, cement, refined mobile, petrol pumps, urea, fertilizer, whatsoever it be, sir. So it is basically an interdependence of many industries. Though to the outside world, the coal industry may appear to be one, but it is basically a conglomerate of industries, which is having a lot of intensive processes, which has got effect not only by the commodity prices, but by the climate changes, by the weather changes, and so many supra and super systems are affecting the mining operation. So under these circumstances, if we go for any sort of energy transition or this net zero concept, then how it is going to impact the total scenario, sir? Sir, these are not the hypothetical questions, but these need to be debated through some sort of future lens. And can we have a sort of future-proof strategy? That future-proof strategy, again, there are 4 or 5 questions which are coming to my mind, sir. The first thing is, it is the perception regarding the fossil fuel which need to be changed, sir, because we are going through the second principle of the environmental law. We are taking a lot of precautions when we talk about the polluter pay principle, either through the ecological restoration or through the plantation or through the CSR activities or through the CR concept. We are doing a lot of work, and whatsoever damages is being caused to the external environment. Again, if the external environment dependence upon the earth system is mitigated, there won't be any change, because the entropy will remain the same, that delta S is not going to change much, and then all the pseudo risks which are appearing to the minds of the people, that will be obviated. So, and if ultimately it has to be done, then I think 4 or 5 aspects or mitigating measures need to be taken into consideration, sir. For any sort of this net zero, the few questions or the few solutions arising out of those questions which come to mind, the first thing is that it is the restructuring of the economy and industry in fossil fuel dependent districts and states. That if we move away from the coal, then how the economy will be restructured. I think some sort of deep-rooted thinking and some sort of policy formulation that how we are going to make this shift, that will be needed. So besides this, the restructuring, the repurposing of the land and infrastructure. For mining purpose, we have acquired and purchased a lot of land and we have created a lot of infrastructure. So if we are going to move, make any significant change, then how we are going to repurpose this land and infrastructure, as these industries hold vast land assets. For example, coal mining and thermal power plants alone, they have got more than around 3 lakh hectares of land, which can be repurposed to build a new green economy. But certainly it's going to take a time. And these all the things ultimately conclude that the fossil fuel is not going to be obviated within the near future, because either the repurposing or the restructuring of the economy is not going to take place very soon. So the third thing, when we come that again, the reskilling, those persons who are trained either for the coal mining or for the power sector or for the steel sector, and if this coal is taken out, then what like the massive plan and program we have for reskilling of those trained manpower who are having this one. So, and then the fourth comes, it is the revenue substitution and investment to be made for this just transition. So this will require progressively moving taxes away from fossil and using fossil fuel tax like the GST compensation, what we call the coal sales, or the DMFT or the NMET. This tax structure is going to be totally changed, and I think some sort of this revenue substitution, because again the total political economy depends upon this thing, and the final, if we consider it in the form of R, so beside this restructuring, repurposing, reskilling, and revenue substitution, the fifth R may be the responsible social and environmental practices during the transition process to create a better world than today. So in my opinion, this energy transition is needed, but some sort of balance is required to be made between the present requirements and the future needs. This can certainly be done through some sort of sustainable mining practices and changing the misconceptions or misperceptions what people have. They need to be changed, they need to be altered, and they need to be obviated from the minds. And that cannot happen through any technology, because it consists of only one T. I think some more teaming with the stakeholders, a more trust building with the stakeholders. So this one T, if combined with 2 more T, this technology is combined with the teaming and the trust building exercises with the stakeholders, because whatsoever future mining we have, it's not going to be relocated anywhere else, and there are certain problems. So some sort of trust building and teaming exercises are required to be made. So in light of these few things, that these all the concepts of either it is the repurposing or restructuring or the reskilling or the revenue substitution or some sort of responsible mining will take time, and we all are moving in that direction. So to mitigate any sort of climate changes, though some sort of transition is needed, but how much time, what will the skill, what will be the scale, and what will the speed for that, up to what time you want to go. I think in the coming near 15 to 20 years, it doesn't appear to be that fossil fuel will go away. And with this, I hope that we have to go do some sort of sustainable and responsible mining. At the same time, we can have a balance with this energy transition also. Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mishra, very much. When Mishra is known as among the in coal circles He's a thinker. He's a thinking CMD. I have known him from his childhood. I mean, even those days, he could articulate things very well. And apart from being a thinker and a dreamer, he has been an ace implementer as well. I mean, the way they're changing the culture of ECL, it's remarkable. As ECL has an old culture, probably dating back to 1774, and that he has been successful to a large extent within such a short time to change that. We have heard him, and I must again repeat to you that he has come here, he has come to join us under very difficult circumstances. His entire coal field is in trouble, and despite that, he has got a head on his shoulders that he has addressed the issue so well. Thank you, Mr. Mishra, but before I leave, I'd like to introduce him to you formally. As you know, he is the Chairman Managing Director of ECL. He completed his BTech mining from Indian School of Mines, Dhanbad, in 1987 and obtained his first class certificate of competency in 1990. He has obtained a postgraduate diploma in business law from West Bengal National University of Juridical Sciences, Kolkata. He has worked in different capacities in SCCL, CCL, and BCCL. He has also served as Director of Production and Planning of Odisha Minerals Development Company Limited. He has attended advanced management programs held at IIM, Calcutta, University of St. Gallen, Switzerland, and ESSEC Business School, Paris, France in 2014. He was also a part of CIL delegation to Istanbul for attending the World Mining Congress in 2011. He has also attended management training program at the Administrative Staff College, Hyderabad, and advanced management programs conducted by IICM at LBSNAA, Missouri. And having heard you, I must pay my tribute to your thinking capacity and the way you had articulated such a difficult subject. We thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Yes,
Thank you.
I now hand over the thing to Mr. Shahi. Probably, I mean, there's some questions and then your views.
Yeah, I think we will spend about 20 minutes. We'll cut short. We'll start a bit late by 15 minutes because.
But we have made up plenty of.
We made up partly, but
yeah.
So let's open up for question answer.
I think there are some questions for Dr. Ktrongia. If you may please attend to them.
Pinderji, I've attempted to respond to a few of them already in the chat, the ones that were typed.
Okay.
Maybe you could pull out the more pressing or general ones, or there are also hands up, like, for example, Dr. Jyoti Parikh is here. She has had her hand up for quite some time.
Sure. Dr. Parikh?
Jyoti?
Yeah, hello, yeah. So, congratulations for organizing such a wide-ranging views to be aired here. First of all, on cumulated emissions, China from 1990 to 2015 has emitted far more than we would ever emit even till going to 2060, 70. And we have done some rough calculations on what India could possibly emit under various circumstances. So there's no need to be diffident with respect to China. Now, but nevertheless, the fact remains that the cyclones are increasing both on East Coast, West Coast, and we have to do something. Second bandwagon that's also emerging as net zero is getting louder is no more coal plants after 2030. So in that sense, I think we would be doing good if you really build first-class, environmentally compliant and low carbon, as far as possible, coal mines, as we wish to open with our own funds, of course, because the foreign funds have stopped long time ago. But then they are now even talking about not having it anywhere in the world. So not that they might succeed, but still we have to keep that reality in mind. I've also raised an issue on just transition for closing old mines and so on. We are restructuring, at least we should restructure towards clean coal. And in doing so, if there are any issues on just transition, we should also start airing them internationally. And first, of course, think ourselves and then airing international. So there are 3 points: accumulated emissions, just transition, and clean coal mines build up fast before people can stop us. Yeah, thank you.
Good. These are just comments, no question. Any other comment or question?
Yeah, I have a comment. Mr. Jain very clearly said that the net zero is a OECD agenda, and the Baltic states and EU countries with a population of 1 to 5 or 6 crores can do it. And the countries like India and China are on a different league. I was just looking at some of the data. Last year in 2020, India's CO2 emissions reduced by 7.1% and coal consumption reduced by 63 million tons, while China's coal consumption went up by 200 million tons, increasing its emissions by about 600 million tons. So that's one part. The second part is that over last 1 year, between September 2020 till August 2021, the import coal prices have gone up, both Australia and Indonesia. The Australian coal prices have gone up from $54 per ton to $167 per ton. Indonesian coal, which is the largest import, have gone up from $30 per ton to $110 per ton. Now, we are largely an importing country, and we have to largely focus on reducing imports to net zero rather than focusing on the net zero emissions. Yes, we do focus on reducing emission intensities of GDP, which is our main ratification at Paris. And that should that is the thing we should focus upon. And net zero is not our cup of tea. Thank you.
Okay. Any other comment?
Sir,
Yes, Malti, go ahead.
thank you, sir. I've been listening to the very insightful and lively discussions on this topic. And 2 things come to my mind. One is that we always quote the example of China, who has announced that they will not do any coal-based plant. But we should also remember that during the first decade of this century, they have piled up coal-based generation to the maximum. And that time we were still struggling, but they were also working on chemicals to coal to chemicals, and also they had maximum power generation within more than last 1 decade. So they can always say we can come to net zero. And exactly with this idea, we also started early on carbon sequestration programs in early first decade of this century. But somehow this kind of analysis is not available. So it was not being pursued. Now we are talking of the same thing, that we should clean coal and we should do a roadmap for carbon capture and storage. But why these were not being pursued, and we had to slowly, it had been going down and down. So I think that way China has done their homework well. And this is what I thought we should be taking care of. Now, one of the things which has pointed out is cost optimization. I think we should look into that aspect now and again look for revive the programs on carbon sequestration.
Good. Any other comment?
Yeah, I am Ajay Kumar Singh from Dhanbad, sir. I was a scientist at Central Institute of Mining and Fuel Research. Sir, I have 2 very small queries, and maybe Rahul or any other expert may answer. The first one is, could coal coexist as part of a net zero emission target? This is number 1. And number two, what would be the implications on the coal sector in India if a carbon market or trading scheme is introduced? These are two of my questions, sir.
So may I
Yes,
say something?
Mr. Verma. That question, Rahul, I will come back to you. He was saying carbon market, so you can answer later, but let us get the comment from Mr. Verma first.
Sir, I have a feeling that overemphasizing the zero carbon or even the introduction of the renewable sources of energy, we must do it very thoughtfully, because we should not endanger the stabilization part of our grid, or maybe here and there some load shedding, etc., because we will not be able to meet the
power
demand.
sector was the one who opposed it. Power
Hello.
sector did not accept, and coal was not
Malti,
willing to.
may I complete?
No, please mute. Others should mute, please. Yeah.
So therefore, I really like the Secretary Cole's speech, who said that it is the Western command or demand or something on us. We are not the leaders in the pollution or the carbon emission, etc. We must do it very carefully. We must see our demand, what is our priority, and we should go ahead in that manner.
Good. Any other comment? Mr. Grover, you wanted to make some comment?
Yes. One point is that industries like zinc, aluminium, steel, etc., big industries, how they can manage on the renewable unless we have got proper economically storage arrangement for that. And then we have to have a mix of both renewable and coal can't be wished to, as everyone has told that. So this point has to be clarified by me, how we meet the industry, major industry demand for next 22 or 3 decades.
All right. Any other comment? That's okay. Grover.
May I come in, sir?
Yes.
Yeah, this is Kanindra Pathak from IIT Kharagpur.
Yes.
First, thank that there are very nice presentations have been made. Few questions. I thank Dr. has already given some answers to my chat. But I was just wondering here, because we'll have to go with our coal. There is no alternative to it, coming at least minimum 2-3 decades. Now here we need to develop some of our national agenda and national program. We should not be discussing only on the net zero of what the globally, definitely that because this climate change is a global issue. But here for our all industrial equal growth with a total contributions to the global warming from India to keep under control. If we practice our net zero, Indian net zero, across our different industries, which are distributed quite a vast area.
All right. You are out now. Any other comment?
We need to not imitate West.
No. Any other comment? Dr. Sarma, I'll come back to you. Anybody else would like to make any comment? Anybody else? Yeah, then now I think Rahul, Rahul, you can answer the one question that Mr. Ajay Singh from Dhanbad made. Rest of the things are comment. Jyoti made comment, Malti made comment, Verma ji made comment, and also Grover made comment. Ajay asked a question about carbon market.
It's an important question, and I would like to step up the question to more than carbon market, to carbon pricing, because market is not the only way. So carbon pricing itself can be done through a market trading scheme, or it could be done through a carbon tax. The actual way where India and most of the world has reduced emissions is not through carbon pricing, which is very modest in most countries except Western Europe, but through portfolio standards, for example, renewable purchase obligations or other fixes. So the question that the world is grappling with is, what is the right instrument needed to encourage it? So the first reaction I have is, for everyone who says renewables are cheap enough that you can shut down your coal, if that is the case, we don't need to have this conversation. Coal will gracefully go out as and when it makes sense. And that is where you then come to the issues of time of day, you come to system level costs, transmission, so many other factors that are missing from a lot of these headline newspaper things. Specifically coming to a carbon price, let's not call it just a tax or a market. The important thing is to apply netback pricing principles, or to look at what is this coal being used for. And this is where you find a very large disparity. Coal going into the power sector actually has relatively easy pathways to be cost phased out over a few decades period. So for example, if you are today you have a coal cess of 400 rupees a ton. 400 rupees a ton coal translates to just over $3 a ton CO2. Depends on emission factor assumptions, 3.2, 3, 3.1, 3.8 using CA estimates, somewhere in that range. So 400 rupees is already costing you a couple of dollars a ton CO2, which translates to 25 paise per kilowatt hour bijli. So now let us say you go to a so-called high carbon price of $40 a ton, which is the number many people throw around globally, meaningful carbon price. That would bump up your cost of electricity by roughly 3 rupees a unit. That is quite substantial in a system where the discoms are bleeding money, and these ultimately have to be borne by the consumers. So global prices do not make sense. IMF has this graded pricing scheme trying to create a floor for carbon prices that are going to differ by country. If you have to put in a global carbon price and there are border adjustment tariffs being discussed, I would advocate that India's position should be fine. Then you need to do it on the basis of cumulative historical emissions as well, because otherwise it just does not add up. So will the carbon price come in India? It will more likely come in mechanisms that is not necessarily a carbon mechanism, but it will come through either like coal cess or steps along the way. And in parallel, we have already mandates upon RE targets and so many of these other things. Reconciling all of these instruments, going sector by sector will be very important. Coal for power sector needs to be decoupled from coal for industry. They need different instruments. They need different trajectories, different cost alternatives and viability. And then if something is not viable, but it's very close, then we can impute a value proposition of carbon. So let's say green hydrogen is a premium. You can work backwards. What is the dollars per ton CO2 that is worth paying for, which is a national policy decision. And again, that would evolve over time. So to close, short run, I don't see a high enough carbon price coming into coal because the price implication is going to be tough.
Okay, Rahul. Mr. Sharma, Dr. Sharma, you wanted to make some additional comment?
I just wanted to say that since we are not into the league and we have already ratified the Paris Agreement to reduce emission intensities of GDP, and that is being followed quite successfully in Indian context, at this point in time, we should not be discussing about, we should not be thinking about, or we should not be bothering about the net zero CO2 scenario. Yes, in a long run, yes, we should find more and more ways as to how to reduce emissions. Those are the things which we should be going on. Like our INDCs do include the green mission where we have about a target of 2,700 million tons of CO2 sequestration. So those kind of measures are much better to reduce carbon footprints instead of talking or bothering about the net zero CO2 emissions. Thank you.
Okay, so I think we have had enough comments and observations, and also the question raised by Mr. Ajay Kumar Singh from Dhanbad was answered very comprehensively by Rahul. See, when this title was chosen, it is not that you are going to become net zero tomorrow or even 10 years or 15 years. Question is journey toward transition. That is why transition. Coal transition to net zero. Net zero is being talked as a concept, as a reality sometime in future. when that future will be, 2050, 2060. Different countries are putting their own targets, and those targets may be again revisited by them, not possible, maybe earlier possible if some new technological things happen. So I think let's not get into that because it's a journey towards that. But from the discussions today, I got many of the speakers, including Rahul presentation, very comprehensive presentation. This was not to defend the case of India versus somebody else. The question is, today, if certain things are available which are of cheaper options, cost optimized options, nobody is putting a condition, but then your power plants are not getting dispatched. So if your power plants are costly, they are not getting dispatched. In the last 7-8 years, or 10 years, from something like 78-79% plant load factor, coal-based power stations plant load factor have reduced to 55% or something like that, may further reduce. It is not necessarily on account of somebody has become more conscious about CO2 and therefore PLF is reducing. Absolutely not. If other options will emerge, if other technological options will emerge, so the two things will move parallelly. Technologically better options which evolve, which gives you, but for a country like India, it should be affordable power, people should get, and if better options between one power plant to another plant, power plant, there is today competition. I think discussions on common but differentiated responsibility of the country, let it be left to the global level arguments and debate. Question is, we should not be under the burden that this is going to happen in next 10-15. In my opening remarks, I also made that point that even International Energy Agency is saying that today 70% of power is from coal-based power generation, coal or lignite. By 2040, that figure might come down to 35%. Today, 5% of power generation is by solar. By the same time, 2040, it is estimated that it might come near again 30-35%. They both will converge. One is at the top and one is at the bottom at 4%, 5% will converge. Now, this is one under the consideration of our thought or our sympathy or about whatever our loyalty about reduction of CO2. Another is also on account of economics of power. India needs cheaper power, so therefore, now there can be debate, this cheaper power, hidden costs and all that, those things we can postpone for some other time. I think that is what was meant in this discussion. To a great extent it has happened, to some extent it may not have happened. Secondly, the purpose was not to make us complacent on not doing anything. That's not okay. This is a reality. Coal will grow. During these 20 years, definitely will grow. Beyond 20 years also, it will grow. I did make a calculation, I mentioned it briefly, that if it has been growing at the rate of 5 to 6%, simple average, it will grow at the rate of maybe less than 2%, not now, but over a period of 20, 25, 30 years. It will still grow. Volume of coal-based power generation, because the growth of power generation will also happen. Somewhere down the line, again after 2040, 50, maybe some other technological changes will happen, we don't know. But at least everybody is saying that. All our documents, all our studies are saying. So we don't need to defend that. But at the same time, we cannot continue to be as irresponsible. Even Power Secretary said that in mining operations, we need to be cautious about carbon footprint. In transportation, we need to be cautious about carbon footprint. In pre-combustion and post-combustion, we need to be. So if something can be done, and in the meantime, if new technologies come, that there could be other products of coal beyond sending it to power generation, boiler and all that, that should be like coal to hydrogen, coal to methanol, coal to gasification. And the point was made that gasification today is a bit complex, but we don't know. Tomorrow, technology or the whole thing can change and it can become easier to handle. There also, we will have some CO2, but then we should think of carbon capture and utilization. Somehow, on those aspects, we have not been very, very active. So the idea was that your transition is not to lead the discussion to a conclusion, that don't worry, business as usual will happen. You may assume that, coal people may assume that, and they will face the problem. Right now, they will face the problem of lower growth rate. After some time, that lower growth rate may become very little. But if from business as usual, we start getting our acts together on these issues, it is not that these issues have no meaning. I mean, giving assurance that it will happen, we can assure ourselves. But these issues have no meaning. We can continue to burn like this. Thermal people can continue to design like this. BHL can continue to manufacture like this. And this has no meaning. I'm sorry, I don't think that was the idea. There are things that have come. Partha has also said cost optimization has to happen. Clean coal technology, not because of coal people only, also because of thermal power people, has been given already a go-by on the beneficiation coal washery. And that was something that could have been done. Even that we have left. So I think the message was that net zero does not mean net zero as it is now, or even 10, 15, 20. We don't know. Journey towards this. This is one. And which is a real issue, and that issue has to be addressed. Second was that definitely there will be other options of power availability. There will be other options of heat, which will be available to people and other industries as well. So therefore, we should be cautious that we are competitive in energy market itself. Like I told you, PLF going from 80% to 55%. So we should be competitive. We can't, nobody can help us because that is what it is needed. Thirdly, we should not be complacent that since this is not happening, therefore we business as usual. So I think so long as we get those messages right, and I write at the highest level, that's why we requested Coal Secretary also to be here, and some of the responsible comments even from coal people, many of the coal people have come that we need to, and Mr. Jha made that point now his point was a little louder because he is also with power industry. That means we need to be more cautious on some of those things that need to be done. I think that should be enough for this. We will be able to summarize as a good learning, good viewpoints, message for others. I mean, we need not be bullish that message for those people that yes, coal is going away. No, absolutely not. Message for coal people that business as usual also would not be okay. You may do that, but then to your own disadvantage in the long run. So I think with that, I close this, but I will request our Secretary General, Mr. Bambani.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. It was a very, I must admit, thanks. Yeah, I must admit, it's not a vote of thanks. I'm just saying that it was a very well structured
no, I think Grover is to give vote of thanks. Yes?
Exactly, yeah, that's what I said.
Mr. Grover. Mr. Grover, vote of thanks, and then you hand over to Mr. Mambani. He is our Secretary General.
Yes.
He
my pleasure. It's my pleasure.
Yeah.
Today's webinar has been most of thought-provoking, and I don't know how to thank everyone. It was so much enlightening for everyone, not only for coal sector. It was meant for everyone. And first of all, let me set that Mr. Gautam and Mr. Kumar set the ball in proper direction, and ably supported by our Secretary, Dr. A.K. Jain. And he went back even to coal to chemical. I'll add up my own personal experience here that in 1958, when I joined School of Mines, there was one coke plant, Baradi coke plant. They were producing chemicals and they were coal tar. And road was made by that only. When oil came in, then bitumen came in. So all those things we have to revive so that coal production keeps on going on. Coal industry doesn't suffer, but country gets advantage of not importing all those things. So it's thought very good. And another thing he mentioned was R&D, research work. Research work has to be focused on every time, but research work by NTPC or Coal India will not matter because like NASA or by our own big research centers, it is done by SIMFAR. SIMFAR is having all the knowledge, all the resources. We should put pressure and get those things done, which has the open eyes both for the coal use and coal producers, everyone. So this is one point which we get message from our Secretary Coal. And next was Mr. Joshi. He made a lot of stress on how to have the stability of energy, security of energy. and that can, as of today, can come more from coal. But coal industry and coal users both have to play an important role. That earlier, as Mr. Shahi was himself telling, that we are using vast coal to cut down the emissions. That has been stopped. We should use higher efficient coal generation stations, wipe off old one, and see that CO2 emission comes down. And we have to survive and meet. We can't 100% compare our generation capacity with the Western world, because developing countries, and still our CO2 emission is less, as everyone is saying. So we have to have a via media where we survive. And that's why thought-provoking by Mr. Joshi is welcome, and he's well known of his contribution for the energy sector. Then came Mr. Rahul Togadi. The lesser the said, the better it is, because he had some good practice suggestions that we should be watchful, but we can't wish away with coal both. And then today we are talking, we are blowing hard and cold one breath. We're saying coal, we're saying no coal. So no one can finance power plant or no one can finance coal. So I have to be very clear, as even Mr. Shahi said, that for next 2-3 decades minimum, we are surviving on coal. So let message very clear that for 3 decades, we should make sure that power sector, coal sector is financed by Indian financial institutions. We don't want to go to abroad, because we have enough resources from Atam Nirvat side. So then comes, I can't speak in everything what has been told, because so enlightening for us. And then Mr. Partho Bhattacharya and Mr. A.K. Jha, they have been stalwarts. They spent their entire life, entire thinking in coal, how to be, their dynamic approach has been helping all of us. So they had some thoughts, and there I will only add slight modification, that coal as it is not polluting that way, except dust and all those, but we are using some diesels and all those things, the road and all those things, where we can cut down that. And same transportation of coal, we should not use the trucks and all those things. Have a system. And then even railways, we have centralized 1 or 2 loading stations with 50, 100 million tons of coal by rapid loading system. We cut down so many advantages and all those. So those need to be, we should learn from all those they have said. So then last but not the least, Mr. Mishra came in, and he also said how we are going to have the things of zero emission. So with that, and at the end, I must say Mr. Shahi's contribution for this Indian Energy Forum has been just fantastic and thought-provoking. Started this in Indian Energy Forum by Mr. Bhami, and ably followed by Mr. Shahi. So that way, we are now is very active, overactive rather, that we are doing everything in a very, very structured manner. And topics are so wonderful. Everywhere learn a lot. So I only request that we should try to implement all the thought-provoking which has come from this Energy and Indian Energy Forum. So that I thank you all very much.
Thank you. Thank you. So do I have the permission now to speak?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you very much. It was a really, I must say, as usual, I always say, our coal summits are our flagship events, very informative. I repeat what Mr. Sai has been saying, that we have a quality speakers. We choose the subject which is very critical and very appropriate. And this is what has been done. Today, it was the 22nd webinar in the row. We have organized since August 2020. All the ideas have been given by our President, Mr. Shahi, and we wish to continue like what has been suggested, that we will always go for the topics which are having relevance in the times to come. The power sector is going through very, very, I must say, a lot of changes today, and we need to. Second thing I want to share with you is that, again, that we have signed the MOU with the International Solar Alliance to jointly promote the solar energy in India and the member countries of the International Solar Alliance. This is another feather in the cap of the India Energy Forum. It is really an honor for India Energy Forum to have signed MOU with the International Solar Alliance with the efforts of Mr. Sai. So today we will be also releasing the 3rd issue of the Total Energy, which will cover the, summary and recommendations of this seminar in our next issue. So thank you very much. I think it's a good thing that until the end, 40 participants, more than 40 participants are continuing. And this is shows the interest. So thank you very much all for your encouragement, for your support, for your guidance. And India Energy Forum will flourish under the leadership of Mr. Shahi and your support. Thank you very much. Good afternoon and enjoy the lunch. Thank you.
We should thank Mr. Bambani and Mr. Rawat. Rawat is our other behind the scene in this, so they are planning and organizing all this. Thanks a lot. All the best.
Thank you very much.